Hi, I'm Peter Brukner, a sports and exercise physician, team doctor to various teams, but nowadays a passionate advocate of healthy eating and convener of SugarByHalf and author of A Fat Lot of Good. You're tuned in to Brad's fantastic podcast, so I hope you enjoy it.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Physio Creme and Pogo Physio. I'm Brad Beer, physiotherapist by trade and training and founder of Pogo Physio. As per the intro, the aim of this show is to educate and inspire you to pursue your physical best performance. We do this through interviews featuring some of the world's top physical performers and also some of the world's preeminent experts in their chosen fields. Each week, we'll aim to bring you the highs, the lows, and the learnings of the featured guests. Today's conversation is one of those expert editions. This is the first Physical Performance Show episode where we dive deep into the world of nutrition and diet. And I cannot think of a better featured interview than today to start this thread of exploration. Today's guest is none other than Dr. Peter Brukner, world-acclaimed sports and exercise physician or sports doctor. He is the author of the recently released A Fat Lot of Good, How the Experts Got Food and Diet So Wrong and What You Can Do to Take Back Control of Your Health. It's with this in mind that I want to share this conversation with you today. I believe the information inside this book will really have an impact on your physical performance, but arguably, more importantly, also your physical health. A Fat Lot of Good is an exploration into basically our current food guidelines and how, as per the subtitle of the book, Dr. Brukner believes we got it so wrong. In this conversation, Dr. Brukner shares around how he shifted from a traditional diet, if you like, to a lifestyle that was centered around low carbohydrate, high fat consumption. Dr. Brukner shares the reasons why he was so compelled to make this change, and he shares the reasons why he believes all people need to consider making this change for the betterment of their health. Dr. Brukner is spending and devoting the last part of his professional career, and I'll give you his full bio in a moment, towards this key message for all Australians and all people internationally, which is his campaign called SugarByHalf. That is aiming to reduce the intake of added sugars by 50% to better our health. So in today's conversation, we'll talk about low carb, high fat lifestyle eating, the benefits of it, the state of the nation, how we got it so wrong, the demonising of fats and how that happened, why we don't need to drink as much as we probably think we need to. Dr. Brukner will share his 5 golden tips, some very practical advice. We'll touch on eating and diet for athletes and also debunk a few myths, such as the purported negative effects of eating eggs, and also clarify why salt intake isn't actually bad for you at all. So there's a lot in this, but by way of introduction, let me give you a little bit of Peter or Dr. Brukner's bio. Dr. Brukner is an Order of Australia Medal recipient. He's a world-renowned sports medicine clinician and researcher. Up until recently, Dr. Brukner held the position of Australian cricket team sports doctor for 5 years, where, as he will share in today's interview, he had an impact on some of Australia's most profiled cricketers. Dr. Brukner has held similar positions with the Liverpool Football Club in the English Premier League, the Melbourne and Collingwood AFL clubs, Australia's Socceroos, and he has been the sports doctor for multiple national, Olympic and Commonwealth Games athletics teams. He's also a professor at Latrobe University in sports medicine. He's the author of numerous books, including Clinical Sports Medicine and Food for Sport. And as I mentioned, he is the founder of the SugarByHalf public health campaign. He's prolific in the media, Fox Footy TV, ABC Radio, The Age. You get the picture. Dr. Brukner is a giant in this field, and what better way to share an insight into where we need to go with our diet than by sharing this conversation with you that I had with Dr. Brukner. Get ready to take a lot of notes, and dare I say, listen back several times. This information is going to really make a difference, I believe, in your health and physical performance. So let's jump in with Dr. Peter Brukner. Your introduction into this world of authoring a fat lot of good and your own personal story, you say it was interesting in science because it was N=1, but can you put us in context of your own personal health journey and why you so passionately threw yourself into researching this book and then outputting it?
Yeah, Brad, look, it all started probably 6 years ago. I was living in England, in Liverpool, and working with the football club there. And, if you'd sort of asked me whether I was healthy or not, I probably would have said, yeah. I was feeling okay. I was working and busy and so on. The reality was that I probably wasn't that healthy. I had a family history of type 2 diabetes. My father had developed diabetes at exactly that age, and at the age of 60. And I was pretty keen not to go down that track because I'd seen the ravaging effect that it had on his health. And I was also overweight, borderline obese. I'd probably put on half a kilogram a year for the previous 30 years, to the point where I was at a BMI of 30, which is sort of on the borderline of overweight and obese. My kids are starting to sort of poke me in the tummy and say, come on, Dad, you're getting a bit tubby. And I'd shrug my shoulders and say, well, hang on, I've been on a low-fat diet, I exercise, and, what else can I do? I also had some metabolic issues. I had a high triglyceride level. I had high insulin levels. I had a condition called fatty liver probably for 10 years, and I had various blood tests that had shown up this condition for the previous 10 years. And like a typical doctor, I'd ignored it, and, I didn't really understand what a fatty liver was, to be honest, and I figured I was on a low-fat diet, so I just ignored it. So I really wasn't as healthy as it probably seemed at the time. And around that time, I heard from a colleague, a chap by the name of Tim Noakes, who's Professor of Sports Science in Cape Town, South Africa, is an old friend of mine. And someone I'd really admired is always someone who challenged sort of orthodoxies in the past and always been proven to be correct. And he sort of come out and said he'd always been a big proponent of carbohydrate as a fuel for exercise. He was an eminent sort of sports scientist who'd written a book called The Law of Running, which is sort of the Bible of all distance runners. And Tim suddenly came out and said, no, I've been wrong, that carbs are not the best fuel for you, and they're in fact bad for your health, and that he'd switched to a low carb, high fat diet and had dramatic improvements in his own health. He'd developed type 2 diabetes and that had resolved and so on. So he was now coming out as an advocate for that, and I thought, whoa, boy, wow, that's really, that's he's finally lost the plot. He's gone crazy. And but because of who he was, and I thought, no, I need to look into this. This is really, this certainly couldn't be right. So I bought a book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes, who's not a doctor, but he's a science writer at the New York Times. And this was the book that changed my life. It was unbelievable. It talked about the sort of the pros and cons of fats and carbs, but most interestingly, it talked about the politics of how the sort of the low-fat movement had won out over the low-carb movement sort of 30 or 40 years ago in the 70s. And that was scary because that had nothing to do with science or evidence, had everything to do with money and politics and egos and the US Department of Agriculture and so on. And that had led to the low-fat guidelines and the obsession we'd had with fat and cholesterol over the last 30 or 40 years. And what this book sort of pointed out very well was that was, as I said, based on no evidence. And I found this book really confronting. I mean, I'd put it down at night and I'd say to myself, no, this couldn't be right. We couldn't have got something as basic as this. The whole of Western society had been on this low-fat diet experiment, really, for 30 or 40 years, and no one had really questioned it. And And it probably wasn't surprising that we were just getting slowly fatter and sicker the whole time. So I then dived into as much as I could. I became a bit obsessed about it and read, 100 books and thousands of articles. And the more I read, the more disturbed I felt. And I thought, no, there's something going on here. So eventually I thought, well, I'm a scientist. I need to do some research. But Brad, as you would know, research with an n equals 1 is a waste of time. Except when the one is you, in which case it becomes very important. So I decided it was time to do an n equals 1 experiment. So on day one, I got all my bloods done, and then I started on this low carb, high fat diet. So I stopped eating sugar, rice, pasta, cereal, bread, fruit juice, all the sort of staple sort of processed foods, if you like. And I went back to eating really the way my grandparents would have eaten, sort of meat and fish and lots of green veg and cream and butter and milk, full fat milk and eggs and nuts and seeds and the only fruit I had was berries and so on. So pretty radical sort of change in my diet. And so on day one, the first thing I noticed was I was no longer hungry. So instead of having my cereal at 8 o'clock in the morning and then then being hungry at sort of 10:30 and thinking, it must be lunchtime soon, I was never hungry. So I'd have my bacon and eggs and so on for breakfast, and all day I just wouldn't be hungry. So I went from eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day to eating 2 meals a day, and I was I'm still that way 6 years later. So that was pretty amazing to me. And then the weight just started coming off. I just started losing weight, and I started feeling really good and energetic, and my exercise improved, and my sleep improved, and my ability to concentrate improved. And so at the end of the 13 weeks, 3 months, I lost 13 kilograms. And, I felt fantastic. And I got my bloods done again, and all my blood sort of issues had resolved. My fatty liver that I'd had for 10 years had completely resolved, was absolutely back to normal. My triglycerides had come down. So I thought, this is just amazing. I mean, there was one major side effect, though. I had to buy a new wardrobe because I had lost that much weight. I couldn't fit into any of my clothes. But I figured that was a small price to pay. So that was really my personal experience. And that just reinforced, I guess, what I'd been reading. And from that point on, I've become a passionate advocate of this way of eating. I don't call it a diet, but it's a way of eating, and it's had continued positive effects on my health, but also the effect of on lots of other people that I've come in contact with, and so I guess that's what really led me to get involved in this campaign and this book. And
Peter, would you say you're healthier now than you were, a decade ago?
Oh, absolutely, far healthier. My I think my cardiovascular risk, if you like, has plummeted. I mean, in retrospect, I was clearly pre-diabetic. I was heading towards type 2 diabetes, exactly the same as my father, and I believe I've reversed that, and I'm absolutely convinced I'm not going to get there because all my bloods are good, and all my health risk factors have been dramatically reduced. So yeah, it's honestly, it's the best thing I've ever done in my life.
So Peter, that really does give some great context there to the journey you went on personally, but also professionally. As you say, you reached out to your respected colleague, Tim Noakes, and he shared with you his journey. But up until getting your own bloods back and seeing the own objective changes on your blood tests that you took at the start of your, changed dietary habits, and then your own observation of your weight reducing, you must have still been sceptical until you saw the objective changes. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, look, I guess so. I was reasonably convinced after what I'd been reading that, that there was something going on here, but my own experience really just confirmed that, and really went, far beyond what I thought would happen. I thought I might lose a little bit of weight, but I just didn't realise it would have such dramatic effects. And really, it sort of the blood tests at the end of it were just amazing. I mean, my fatty liver that I'd had for 10 years completely disappeared. So my blood test went absolutely back to normal. My triglycerides came down to normal. My HDL cholesterol went up. I mean, it was quite remarkable. So I really sort of turned my health around in that 13 weeks, and that was very exciting for me, I guess. And I guess I just wanted to share that with people. And as I said, the more I read and the more I spoke to other people and other people who tried it, had similar experiences, and just confirmed what I suspected, that we got things wrong and that we needed to change things. So ultimately, I've been writing and speaking for the last few years, and then I got approached by a publisher to write a book. And initially I thought, look, there's plenty of books out there. Who needs another diet book? Really. I mean, the bookshops are full of them and so on. But they convinced me, I guess, that I had an important message to put across, and then because I was a doctor, I guess I had a bit more credibility than some of the other people who write these diet books. And I sort of decided, look, it was a pretty good way to get my message across. And I sort of figured I'd spent the last 6 years, I'd probably spent 2 or 3 hours a day for the last 6 years reading stuff, just devouring everything I can on this topic. And I thought, well, I can sort of summarise all that and put it down on paper. We'll save other people happy to do that, and hopefully it'll have some positive health outcomes. And that's proven to be the case. I've had so much good feedback from people. I get an email every day probably saying from someone, thanks so much, it's changed my life, and which is very, very nice. No one ever wrote to me about their knee or their ankle, but they wrote to me about their health. And while I still love sports medicine, and it's obviously very dear to me, and I spent my whole life in it, I just sort of feel that this is a more important thing for me to do at the moment. So I've sort of stopped pretty much most of my sports medicine involvement. My last team involvement was with the Aussie cricket team a year ago, and I'm really devoting myself full time to this cause at the moment, and our campaign, SugarByHalf.
And Peter, at the start of the book, Shane Watson, Australian cricketer, writes the foreword, which, I think it's been a well-publicised story, I believe. At some point might have even been 60 Minutes, or there was a story that I remember seeing on the television about this. But can you share a little bit of Shane Watson's transformation, one of Australia's, great cricketers?
Yeah, look, Shane has been someone who'd always struggled with his weight, he basically had found that the only way he could sort of keep his weight under control was basically starving himself. And he said he'd just be so miserable. He loves his food, Shane, and he'd just be miserable. He would just not eat, and he'd have a high level of exercise, obviously, so he'd struggle with that. And he was just constantly hungry. So ultimately, he would succumb and get back on that sort of cycle of putting weight back on. And I guess the thing that we were, on a tour of India, and we'd sort of sit down every night for dinner and chat about diet and so on. It was just after I lost all my weight, and he became a real enthusiast. And the thing that he liked was that he could eat a reasonable amount of food and still control his weight, because that's the thing about there are probably 3 ways that you can lose weight, that have been scientifically proven. I mean, one, you can have bariatric surgery. Well, that's pretty radical, but that works. The second one is, as Shane said, you can basically starve yourself. You can have a really low-calorie diet, but that's incredibly hard to maintain. You're constantly hungry. You also change your metabolic rate to sort of slow that down, so that, when you do crack and eat again, you actually put on more weight. And then there's what I believe, and Shane agrees, is the sustainable way to keep your weight under control, and that's with a low carb, high fat sort of a diet, because of this hunger thing. You're just not hungry. You're so satiated or full as a result of eating plenty of good healthy fats that you don't overeat. And so I think for a sports person, well, for anyone really, but for a sports person in particular, weight is a big issue. And it always sort of surprises me that, there are so many sort of people out there who exercise a lot, and even professional sports people who exercise, all day, and are still, a little bit overweight. And I think that's because they have to have massive amounts of carbohydrates to sort of fuel their exercise if they're exercising on carbs. So, this alternate way of doing it by using fat as your fuel is a great way of keeping your weight under control and very healthy as well. So, that was basically Shane's journey, and he's still going strong at 36 or whatever, and single-handedly won the IPL final for his team this year, and he's still a big advocate of this way of eating.
And I mean, he sums it up by saying he had a family history of type 2 diabetes. It brought to Shane much needed, in his words, logic to his inexplicable battle to maintain his weight and skin folds, even while he devotedly followed the dietary advice he'd been given as an athlete. So, that's really interesting. Peter, your diet rules, just to make this very simple, and I really appreciate when I read A Fat Lot of Good how much work had gone into it. That was the distilling of, as you say, years of your own interest reading, but also your own professional reading, distilled into what's really, just under 350 pages of information. Your diet rules were this. My rules were pretty simple, you're right. If quite dramatic compared to my old eating habits, there was no more sugar or junk food, but more importantly, no more rice, pasta, potatoes, bread or cereal. There was no fruit juice, and the only fruits I would eat would be a few berries. Instead, I was going to have some of the things we'd been told for the past 30 years were bad for us: eggs and bacon, butter, cream, cheese, full-fat milk, grass-fed meat, cold water fish, salmon and sardines, nuts and plenty of green vegetables. I wasn't counting calories, but was keeping a check of my total daily carbohydrate intake, aiming for a low intake of 30 to 50 grams. Well, down on my previous intake of the previous 200 grams per day. So I think that really just distills it down. It doesn't need to be complicated. And you outline five rules in A Fat Lot of Good. Can you take us through those 5 golden rules, Peter?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the first one is avoiding sugar. I mean, I think, sugar is such I think everyone agrees on that, that we've just got too much sugar in our diet. And it's both the obvious forms of sugar, like the soft drinks and sodas, but it's also some of the hidden forms of sugar, and there's lots of sugar in, like, for instance, fruit juice. I mean, we've always sort of associated fruit juice with being healthy, and yet, it's really full of sugar. You're much better off having an apple and a glass of water than having a glass of apple juice, because they've taken all the goodness really out of the apple and just left the sugar in it. So another, lots of processed, foods have added sugar. Things again that we thought were healthy, things like a fruit yogurt, for instance. It's full of sugar. Muesli bars, sauces. Tomato sauce or barbecue sauce, full of sugar. So number one rule was basically go with sugar. Go with avoiding sugar. You can't go too far wrong with that. Along with that, it's avoiding processed foods. If there was one, if you had to sum it up in one sort of line, you'd say, well, eat real food, rather than processed foods. And so they were the two of the other rules. Is avoid processed foods and focus on real food. So, the foods you mentioned, the meat and fish and eggs and fruit and veg in particular. Not so much fruit. Fruit's got a lot of sugar, a lot of fructose in it. So I cut back a bit on the fruit, and focus on that real food rather than processed food. I mean, 70 or 80% of processed food has added sugar in it, so that really tells you everything you need to know. It's not it's not healthy, but there's a massive marketing exercise going on. I mean, you look at most people, they. By the time they leave home in the morning, they've had, a glass of fruit juice, they've had a bowl of cereal, they might have had a fruit yogurt, they might have had a piece of white bread with some jam on it, and they've had a cup of coffee with 2 spoons of sugar. They've already had about 20 teaspoons of sugar before they leave home in the morning. So it's and we're advising people to have no more than 6 for the day. So it really is a major issue. So they're really the rules. Avoid sugar. Focus on real food, avoid processed food. The other thing that concerns us is what we refer to as vegetable oils, or seed oils. They really are. Things like your canola and your safflower and your soybean oil and corn oil and so on. And they've really been shown to be pretty unhealthy. They're full of what we call omega-6 fats, which are very inflammatory in nature. So a lot of chronic disease we have is due to chronic inflammation, and we're finding that if we reduce those oils, then there's a reduction in inflammation. So rather than cooking in those, because what happens when you heat those oils is they become oxidised, and they put out some pretty nasty substances, some aldehydes and so on, trans fats and so on. So you're much better off cooking with old-fashioned sort of, butter or lard or olive oil, coconut oil, and so on. So they're and then the final rule is not getting too obsessed about drinking huge amounts. I mean, we've become a society where we just constantly have to have a bottle in our hands or and really there's not a lot of we've survived for the last 100,000 years or whatever without having bottled water and having to take our drink bottle around with us. We drank when we're thirsty. Well, that seems pretty logical to me. Drink when you're thirsty. So the only times you don't really have to do that is probably if you're exercising in hot conditions and so on. You probably need a bit more fluids. But otherwise, there's no scientific evidence to show that there's 8 glasses of water a day and all this sort of stuff. That's there's no evidence for that. It's just become sort of again a bit of a marketing exercise. Keep drinking because if you told our grandparents that people would be paying to drink water, they'd have looked at you as if you're absolutely crazy. So so they're my five golden rules, if you like, and I think if you stick to them, you can make some dramatic improvements in your health.
Peter, what I love about those 5 basic golden rules is that they are they're common sense and they're basic. And I know that when you launched the SugarByHalf campaign, yourself and some peers there, you were concerned about the fact that there'd been so many people passionately advocating certain diets, paleo, low carb, high fat, Atkins, Mediterranean, etc. People were probably a little bit confused. I know I was, Peter. I'm a physiotherapist, so mainly with a musculoskeletal hat on in what I do professionally, but I felt confused, and this book for me has really equipped me and empowered me. And I mentioned before we went on air to record this that I've already changed things in my diet, and I've lost 2 kilos just in the last few weeks since reading A Fat Lot of Good, simply by reducing some of my processed food intake and carbohydrate. So what I love about this is it's really simple. The 5 golden rules don't need to be complicated.
No, it really is very, very simple, and it's enjoyable. I mean, I enjoy every meal I eat. People sort of say, "Oh, how do you manage without bread or without cereal or whatever?" I mean, I'm eating really good stuff. I mean, as I said, I only need 2 meals a day now. So I'll have a meal sometime in the morning. It depends what I'm doing, but if I'm just at home working, I'll probably have a meal in mid-morning or something like that. I might, if I feel like cooking something, I'll cook some eggs and bacon and mushrooms, or have some smoked salmon and have some avocado with it, or else I'll just get a big bowl of full-fat Greek yogurt and some nuts and seeds and berries and throw a bit of cinnamon on top and have that. So that keeps me going till the evening, where I have my just pretty much standard meat or fish and, lots of green veg. And if I'm, still hungry after that, which I rarely am, I might just have some berries and full-fat cream and, have a little morsel of dark chocolate, for supper and with my green tea, and that's about it. So, I really, as I said, I enjoy it, and I don't have a problem when I go out. You can always find things to eat. You might go to a restaurant and order a meal, and they'll give you meat and fish and veg, and I just say to them, look, instead of the potato, can I have an extra serve of veg? And they look at you a bit strangely, but they never said no. And, so it really is not as hard as people think. I mean, the thing most people fear is giving up bread, and it's really not that hard. I mean, you feel so much better. I mean, so many people have gut problems as a result of eating a lot of grains, and bread is our major source of that. And it's amazing how many people who'll sort of change their diet for other reasons like weight loss or diabetes, but they'll come to you a couple of weeks later and say, "Oh yeah, all that gut stuff I've had, that I've never mentioned to you, all the bloating and the bowel issues and so on, they've all disappeared. So it really is does amazing things for your health, and that's very motivating. People say, "Oh, how can you stick at it?" And you say, "Well, you feel so good. It's very easy to stick at it, and plus, all your health markers are good and your weight's good. So there's a lot of positive reinforcement that makes it very rewarding and I think quite easy to stick to this diet. Plus the fact that you're never hungry. So really, it's got a lot going for it. So, as I said, I feel as though I'm a lot healthier than I was. Well, I know I'm a lot healthier than I was 6 years ago.
You're listening to Dr. Peter Brukner, sports and exercise physician and author of A Fat Lot of Good, sharing around the insights that he learnt through 6 years of comprehensive reading to distill it into one easy to digest and read book. Support for today's show comes from PhysioCrem. PhysioCrem is a topical massage cream containing natural plant-based ingredients, ideal for the temporary relief of muscular aches and pains. If you're conscious of what you put on your body, you'll be happy to know that PhysioCrem does not contain parabens or hydroxybenzoates. It is clean to use and pleasant smelling, with the smell fading away in minutes. Its non-greasy formula doesn't leave any sticky residue behind either. PhysioCrem can be found easily in chemists and health stores Australia-wide, as well as via their online shop. They've generously offered up 20% discount off all of their products for the listeners of the Physical Performance Show. It's really easy to access this 20% off. Simply use a coupon code POGO, that's POGO, when you shop at physiocrem.com.au. Now that's FISIOCREM.com.au. Hurting sucks and PhysioCrem have got your back. Stay tuned in for the end of the show to find out how you can win a fantastic PhysioCrem pack for one lucky listener. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo Physio to cross their physio finish line. That's where we high-five you and celebrate the fact that you have completed rehabilitation and that you are back to your physical best. In addition to traditional session-to-session appointments, we offer some industry-first models of care to help you save money and recover faster. These include our 2, 6 and 12-week fixed-fee unlimited rehabilitation programs known as Finish Line programs, and our very popular monthly fixed-fee wellness booster packages, which include services such as physiotherapy, remedial massage, clinical Pilates, and use of state-of-the-art equipment such as the Alta G anti-gravity treadmill, starting from a low $195 health fund rebatable per month. To find out more about Pogo Physio's services, jump over to pogophysio.com.au and schedule your initial 1-hour appointment. For now, let's jump back to Dr. Peter Brukner, author of A Fat Lot of Good, leading sports and exercise physician.
Peter, part one of the book, just going back for a moment there, you've titled The State of the Nation. Probably the two things that jumped out to me most alarmingly with that were that this generation might be the first to have a shorter life expectancy than the previous generation, and also that inside Australia here, that 280 people every day are developing type 2 diabetes, and that's nearly 5 million Australians that are classified as obese, which has risen from what you state, 19% of the population in 95 to 28% of the population in 2015 in over just 20 years. So can you paint a little bit of a picture of the state of the nation of Australia at the moment and why things need to change?
Well, yeah. I mean, we always sort of pride ourselves on being this sort of, sunny, healthy, active sort of, nation. And the reality is that we're right up there with the highest obesity rates in the world. They did, and someone looked at the recent soccer World Cup. They looked at the 32 finalists in the World Cup, and they graded their obesity rates, and we won the bronze medal. We didn't win the bronze medal in the real soccer, but we had the third highest obesity rate out of those 32 countries. And we're in the sort of top half dozen westernised countries in the world for obesity. On a par with the UK New Zealand, and just a fraction behind the Americans. So, we really are not as healthy as we sort of like to think we are, and type 2 diabetes is a massive problem. I mean, I'm dare saying every one of your listeners, Brad, knows someone, a parent or a grandparent or someone who's developed type 2 diabetes. And I watched my father's health deteriorate with type 2 diabetes and all the complications they get, whether that be their heart or their cardiovascular system or their arteries, their kidneys, their eyes, huge issues with health. And so, we're always told that, type 2 diabetes is sort of an irreversible condition, and there's nothing you can do about it, just take some drugs and things. But that's not true. It's both a preventable and a reversible condition. And if you reduce the amount of carbs on your diet, you can actually reverse that. They're showing it now in studies and in research. You can actually reverse your type 2 diabetes. So, if we can do that, that'd be an enormous sort of step forward. Because just apart from anything else, the cost of type 2 diabetes, to our society is billions and billions of dollars a year. You'd drastically cut your health budget if you managed to get rid of some of these chronic diseases. The worst of which is type 2 diabetes. So, we're really and chronic diseases that weren't even around when I was a medical student. And we'd never heard of Alzheimer's disease and gluten insensitivity and things like that. There's links. There's really interesting dietary links now to a whole bunch of chronic diseases, and that I think we're going to find over the next few years more and more evidence that poor diet, in particular high sugar and high carbohydrate and high processed food levels, are associated with a lot of these conditions that we're seeing now. They're even describing Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes, such as the link between sugar and Alzheimer's. So none of which is absolutely proven as yet, but I think we're heading in that direction. So we can really make a drastic difference to our health through making some relatively simple changes. I mean, not everyone has to go sort of, really hardcore sort of ketogenic, 20 grams of carbs a day. Sure, if you've got one of these chronic diseases and you're unwell and so on, you have to take some radical action, at least initially, to get your health under control. But even if people just cut their carb intake, cut their sugar intake, from 200 or 300 grams a day down to 100, they're going to make a huge impact on their health. So there's the bad news is that we're in a pretty bad way, but the good news is that there's a way we can improve things. The concern is that we're just drifting along the same way we've been doing for 30 or 40 years. I mean, we've basically got, ever since those low-fat dietary guidelines came in around 1980, we've just got fatter and sicker, and yet we just still seem to accept them as gospel and continue on, and we're going to continue to get fatter and sicker unless we change the way we eat. And more and more people now are realising that this sort of low carb way of living. I don't actually call it a diet because to me a diet is sort of something short term.
Yep.
Whereas this is not a short. This is just a way of eating, a way of living.
Yep.
That we resolve we're going to live without so much sugar and without so much carbs and be so much healthier for it. So I see it as a way. It's the only possible solution we have to our health issues. It was where people say, "Oh, you've just got to exercise." Well, we're actually exercising pretty much the same amount we did 20 or 30 years ago. It's changed a little bit in that in those days it was more probably work related, but now obviously a lot of people are doing additional exercise and so on. So the absolute exercise levels haven't changed much. The thing that's changed is our diets.
Peter, you mentioned the dietary guidelines that came in the 1980s. There's a section in the book is titled "How Did We Get It So Wrong?" And and can you speak to that? How did we get it so wrong? You mentioned briefly at the start that there were some commercial drivers behind the dietary guidelines, but then how did we as a society just accept that and never challenge it until people like yourself, Tim Noakes, people with great credibility in the medicine profession start to put this up in lights? How did we get it so wrong?
That's the most bizarre aspect of this whole thing. We basically changed the whole way we ate back around that 1980. on the basis of a very small group of people and some dodgy research. There was a guy in America, a guy by the name of Ansel Keys, and he's got a lot to answer for. And he was a big proponent of that fat was the cause of heart disease and cardiovascular disease, and that the solution was to take fat out of the diet. And he had an opponent in the UK, a guy called John Yudkin, who was equally as adamant that sugar was the problem. But Keyes was very influential politically, and he did some research, a couple of pieces of research called the 6 countries and the 7 countries study. And those studies he published and showed that there was seemed to be a correlation between the higher the fat intake in a country, the higher the mortality from cardiovascular disease. And he presented that and convinced that the US Senate, who had a big inquiry into this, that this was the cause. Now, it turned out that this 7-country study was actually a 22-country study, but because the other 15 countries didn't sort of fit into the graph too nicely, he just decided to omit them, and so he could have a straight line correlation. When you actually put the other 15 countries back in, it was all a big sort of jumbled mess, and there was no correlation at all. So it was quite dishonest research. And so he convinced the US Senate, Senator McGovern, who was actually a failed presidential candidate, but he was head of this committee, and Keyes, convinced him that fat was the way to go. And even at the time, the American medical establishment said, no, there's no evidence for this. This is way too early. We can't do this. And McGovern's response was, well, we can't wait for the evidence forever. We've got to do something. And it was a time when, President Eisenhower had a heart attack, and there was a lot of focus on this increasing problem of heart attacks. And then so they convinced the American Senate to bring in this low-fat guidelines, and what they did was they set up a committee to establish these guidelines. And recently, one of the dietitians on that committee revealed that they'd sent the recommendations through to the US Department of Agriculture, who were supposed to run this whole show, suggesting that maybe 2 serves of grains and cereals a day was the maximum. And then when it was published, it was 6 to 11 serves of grains or cereals. So the Agriculture Department had adjusted it somewhat. And, you can see why they would do that, because it benefited the farmer. So there was really a combination of poor research, politics, and the financial implications of the US capitalisture system that combined to give us a bad policy. And then, of course, everyone sort of capitalised on that policy. I mean, all the pharmaceutical industry created drugs that reduced cholesterol. The food industry, created a whole lot of processed foods that were low fat. So there was this massive industry that came to benefit from those guidelines. The only people that didn't benefit were the public, who were just getting fatter and sicker. But that didn't matter as long as everyone else was doing okay. So it really is. It's an amazing story and quite a scary one.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was reading Torb's book, I found it really disturbing. Just so hard to believe. But that's the reality. And we've, as a result, the scores on the board. We've just got fatter and sicker ever since those guidelines have come together.
And as you say, our exercise levels really probably haven't gone backwards; they've stayed the same. And yet, it is scary. And that's the word that I had in my head, Peter, it's scary that as a nation, as the world, the modern world, we can be we're just led by these things without ever questioning them. And gosh, even people like yourself, medically trained, it takes your own health, I guess, mini crisis to send you searching for answers. So really, in summary, fats were demonised, and they weren't necessarily, they didn't need to be.
No, exactly. And poor people would be deprived of all those really good foods for the last 30 or 40 years, and we haven't been able to have. Gosh. But I mean, if you're looking at one, single thing, I mean, replacing a healthy animal fat, like butter, with a processed chemical like margarine, with artificial flavour, artificial colours, going through this incredibly complex, and it's not even food really. I mean, that would have to rank as the single craziest decision in history, really. And fortunately, most people seem to be, starting to realise that now. But look, I mean, I feel guilty myself. I mean, I didn't wake up to it till I was 60 years old. I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone of just acquiescing to what we're told, and we do that as doctors. The other problem with doctors is that we're not really trained in nutrition. We really don't understand it. Our comfort zone is sort of medications and surgery and so on. We're not good on nutrition and exercise and things like that. So you stick to what you know largely, and what we're taught and what we know is you treat disease with medications. And we've got to get better than that. We've got to be able to firstly prevent disease, and we just have the wrong sort of medical system. Really, we sort of sit around and let people eat rubbish and sit in their backsides and wait till they get sick, and then we sort of throw drugs and surgery at them. It just doesn't make any sense. You're much better off preventing the disease in the first place, and the way we do that is primarily with a sensible diet, but obviously things like exercise and reduce stress and sleep and so on are all very important. But I think diet is the number one factor.
Peter, a great example of someone that didn't follow the herd is my father. He's approaching 70. He's as lean as a bean, always been active. He's a butcher, still works as a butcher full time. And I used to say to my dad, Dad, you're having too many animal fats. You'd eat the fat on, the animals, and you'd eat eggs and bacon. I'd be like, Dad, I'm learning as I'm going through as a student, then into university. What about your arteries? It's going to harden up your arteries. And yet Dad's cardiovascular profile, Peter, is brilliant.
Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, they're smarter than us. That's for sure. And that generation, really, they got it. You've actually got to eat fat and to lose fat. It's a weird thing. And that's the hardest thing I found, is just getting my head around the fact that we've been sort of indoctrinated for 30 or 40 years that fat is bad, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh no, maybe it's not, and then that's really quite challenging, and sort of not resisting that urge to, trim the fat off the meat and have, fatty meats and full fat things and so on. That's quite hard. I certainly found that the most challenging aspect of it all, just getting my head around it. All of a sudden, what you've been thought was right for 30 or 40 years, it's actually the exact opposite. So that's very challenging, and I think a lot of people have trouble with that, as I did. But as I said, the proof is in the pudding, if you'll excuse the pun. I mean, you just feel so much better. I mean, it's just quite incredible. I mean, I had two emails last week in consecutive days, and both people who weren't connected at all, they both used exactly the same phrase. They said, "I've lost my brain fog."
Wow.
Which I thought was really interesting, that they both use exactly the same phrase. It's not a phrase I don't think I even have in the book, but they both use that phrase, that they think more clearly and they've lost this fog, and that's a really that's, I think, a very powerful message, that you think I can, certainly personally, my work capacity and my ability to, just writing the book that I've just written, I do 14 hours a day of writing now. I could never have done that, when I was on a high sugar diet. I just would be falling asleep in the afternoon. I used to have the classic, after lunch you'd feel all drowsy and fall asleep and so on. I go all day now, and I just don't get fatigued. So it just does. I know this all sounds a little bit too good to be true, and but in my case, that's the way I feel. I can't believe that I feel so good, and I do feel a bit annoyed with myself that I didn't wake up to this earlier, and because there obviously have been a few people, Atkins and people like that were onto this a long time ago, and we all poo-pooed them, and I certainly did, and I'm embarrassed to think of some of the advice I've given, patients and friends over the years, and family. My kids, God, it's a wonder they got any brains left. They're all the sugar we gave them, but they seem to have survived despite that anyway.
The brain fog's interesting. Practically, what could be the link there?
Well, it's very interesting. There's We've known for a long time that a condition like epilepsy, for instance, is really helped by reducing the amount of sugar going onto a low-carb, high-fat diet. So we've known, that in that case that sugar has an effect on the brain in some way, and or excess sugar. So we probably shouldn't be surprised, but we've never really sort of documented it and got it sorted exactly how that happens. But what happens is that sugar combines with proteins and they get glycated, and that can sort of cause damage to the mitochondria and cells. It's pretty complicated, but there's increasing evidence that sugar and some of these vegetable oils in particular are really quite toxic to cells. So I think it's it's really exciting in a way that here we've got a way of improving a whole lot of chronic conditions without requiring drugs, which all have their side effects and so on. I mean, just take mental health, for instance. There's some really interesting work. Felice Jacker and Deakin University and people like that are doing some great work looking at the effect of diet on things like depression and anxiety and so on. So I mentioned the Alzheimer's work. There's some really interesting work using diet as an adjunct to standard sort of cancer therapy, and I think we're going to see more and more of this over the next decade or so, is the role of diet in both the prevention and the treatment of these chronic diseases, all these autoimmune diseases that we're seeing now so much of, and the various arthritises and so on. I mean, it's inflammation. We now sort of believe that low-grade chronic inflammation. I mean, as physio, you would know, Brad, we all sort of see inflammation. We see acutely inflamed joints or tendons or whatever, but it's more this sort of low-grade chronic inflammation that seems to be the underlying cause of a lot of chronic disease, whether it be atherosclerosis, which we always thought was cholesterol, and we now sort of believe it's more the inflammation that damages the arterial wall, which then sort of attracts the passing cholesterol, if you like. So it's really the inflammation that's the underlying cause, not the cholesterol. So, these things are really fascinating, and I think if we can improve our nutrition, we can really tackle some of these chronic diseases that seem to be just getting out of control at the moment. So it's very exciting stuff.
You're listening to Dr. Peter Brukner, leading sports and exercise physician and author of A Fat Lot of Good, sharing around this key message of reducing our carbohydrate intake and also cutting by half the amount of added sugar that we consume in our diets. If you missed last week's episode featuring Jared Clifford, world para-athletic bronze medalist in the 1500 metres and world record holder in the T12-13 visually impaired class, then here's a little snippet of what you missed.
I can do anything. My disability won't stop me doing anything. I can go out into the world, and just because I have a vision impairment, it's not going to stop me. First time I realised that I would be okay at running was a talent search with the Australian Paralympic Committee. I did a beep test and they were pretty impressed by it, and they were like, yeah, I think you should probably try running. To tune into the full episode, be sure to jump back to the archives of the show right from within your favourite podcast player, and there you can peruse the archive of featured performers, expert editions and interest editions of the Physical Performance Show. For now, let's jump back with Dr. Peter Brukner on this expert edition, sharing around all things SugarByHalf and his recent publication, A Fat Lot of Good. How the experts got food and diet so wrong and what you can do to take back control of your health. It's a must read.
One of the things I felt liberated around having finished A Fat Lot of Good is debunking the myth around, salt and what you term the salt blood pressure hypothesis, a little bit like the debunked diet heart hypothesis with the demonising of fats. So salt, Peter, can you take us a little bit briefly into the world of salt? And as you say, maybe why we've been targeting the wrong white crystal.
Yeah, well, yeah, look, we have been a bit obsessed about salt, and we do have a pretty high salt intake, and that's because of all the processed foods. There's so much salt in processed foods, and it seems that there's a lot of debate about salt. But if I could summarise it, it seems that a very high intake of salt and a very low intake of salt are both bad for your health. But there's a pretty big range in the middle where salt doesn't seem to be a problem. Now, the people who have the very high intake of salt are the people who live off a processed food diet. Who just and all processed food has quite high salt levels. So if you actually reduce the amount of processed foods, or if you eliminate processed foods from your diet, as I've done, I actually have to add salt to my food because I'm in danger of having too low a salt diet because I don't have really any source of salt. It's really getting the balance. But I don't think our obsession with salt. If you've got high blood pressure, reducing and you have a high salt intake, then sure, reducing your salt intake to a normal salt intake can help your blood pressure a small amount, and it's certainly worth doing. I mean, we certainly shouldn't have a really high salt intake, but as I said, if you cut back on processed food, your salt intake will normalise and you'll be fine. So I don't think it's as big a problem as sugar, really. I know it's not nearly as big a problem as sugar. So sugar is really the important factor that's causing so many of these problems. But when we get distracted by things like salt and so on, just avoid really really low and really high salt. But there's a broad range and the average salt intake from Australians at the moment is sort of in that broad range. So as long as you're not going crazy on processed food, you're okay with salt.
And, talking about objective numbers here, with sugar, as you say, that's the greater concern. The average daily intake for Australians, I believe, is an extra 16 teaspoons per day of added sugar, more in teenagers, as you write, when the World Health Organization has said that 6 teaspoons is more like the ideal, right?
Yeah, that's right. And, it really is, we're way over. And I think that's probably a conservative estimate. That doesn't count the sort of natural sugars in fruit and dairy and so on. So, 16 teaspoons a day. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but, when you think that, there's about, 16 teaspoons in a 600 ml bottle of Coke. So, it's not hard to get that 16 teaspoons if you're drinking soft drinks and eating a lot of processed foods and so on. So, if we can cut down to 6, which is what the World Health Organization suggests is ideal, and that's the basis of our campaign, SugarByHalf, which we started a couple of years ago, and that's the aim of that is, it's obvious, is to reduce the amount of added sugar by a half. And so, if we can get down somewhere near that World Health Organization recommended level, it will make a massive difference to the health of Australians. I mean, I can't think of any other intervention, given that we've done smoking and that we can do better, but, that's had its big impact. I mean, the next big impact is to reduce the amount of sugar. And if we could, let's dream and say, okay, in the ideal world, we've managed to reduce the amount of sugar by a half, then it'll have a massive impact on our health, generally, and obesity, diabetes in particular. So that's our aim, and we're working on that, and we're working through various aspects of the campaign at the moment. We hope to launch a big national campaign in the not too distant future, along the lines of some of the successful public health campaigns of the past. So we're just trying to put together the funding at the moment for that, and unfortunately, our government is a bit reluctant to take some of the obvious steps, with food labelling and advertising and sugar taxes and things like that. They seem politically very reluctant to do that, and we need to have a mass sort of movement really in the country that almost forces the government to take some action. So it's a combination of both the individual understanding the role of sugar more, and but also indirectly pressuring the government to take action.
What would be 3 practical things you'd change today if you could?
Well, I would. What would I do? Okay, I'd have proper labelling on food. So I'd have front of packet labelling with teaspoons of sugar. So I'd have a teaspoon of sugar on the front of every food label, and I'd have a number in it. And that told you the amount of sugar that was in that food. So if you had a 900 ml bottle of Masterfoods barbecue sauce, it would have the number 125 on it. So 125 teaspoons in a large of sugar in a large bottle of barbecue sauce. So things like that. Because at the moment, labels are confusing. They're in tiny print. They're hidden on the back of food. So that would be the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do would be I would reduce advertising of junk food and soft drinks. I'd extend the the fairly brief hours that they're reduced at the moment to proper hours where kids are likely to be watching television, probably up till 9 o'clock at night. And I would the third thing is I would implement a sugar tax. I would tax all foods that contain excessive amount of sugar, and put a financial penalty on that. And I would use the funds that generated by that to promote healthy eating among children, among schools, because our kids are the big issue. I mean, more than a quarter of our kids are overweight or obese. And that's crazy. And we know that overweight kids become overweight adults and so on. So if I had a fourth thing, I'd probably improve the nutrition education in schools and run a big campaign through schools to improve, or to get healthier eating, get people eating real foods and avoiding processed food. So there's four things. There you go.
Very practical. Peter, I first learned of this, I think, through the television piece with yourself and Shane Watson. And at the time I was running marathons, and my thoughts were, that all makes sense. This is Peter Brukner talking, and also Tim Noakes. These are very credible people. You've got to take notice. I felt like that as a health professional, but then I was a bit confused about, well, I've got to fuel my marathon running, 100K a week plus full-time work. So what would be your advice to high energy output individuals listening, athletes pursuing, say, endurance sports, in terms of how this fits in? Do they need to do anything different, Peter? Do they need to change anything that they might read in a fat lot of good?
No, look, I mean, I think there's a lot of endurance athletes now who've switched over from carbohydrate-based diet to a fat-based diet, because as you would know, Brad, I mean, one of the limitations of fueling yourself with carbs is that you run out of carbs after a period of time. Probably about you can store about 2 hours of running worth, and then you hit the wall. and whereas we've got even the skinniest person has almost unlimited fat supply, fat as a fuel, and so you can go go an indefinite amount. Now the issue is it's the high intensity activities that probably require carbs, but endurance activities, other than at a really high level, you can manage perfectly well using fat as your fuel. So that's been a massive change. I mean, so many of the top endurance athletes now have a primarily fat fueled basis to their sport. So it's something that you need to, I wouldn't do it the week before you run your marathon. I'd do it in a quiet time when you're not haven't got an upcoming race or anything like that. But switching from a carbohydrate fuel to fat fuel can be very rewarding, and as well as performance issues, there's a whole lot of other issues, with apart from your general health. I mean, there's other issues like recovery and reduced inflammation and so on. So they're really helpful things. So I think there are a lot of athletes making that switch at the moment. I think. Some people, there are certainly some, I have cyclists, for instance, who basically have switched to a fat-based diet, but just find that they, if they need to sprint or climb, they need that extra little bit of something. So, I encourage them to take some carbs with them and have some carbs if they need to. But primarily, 99% of the time they're on a fat fuel, fat as a fuel. So there's a lot of individual variation. Some people find they need more carbs than others, but we certainly don't need the amount of carbs that we've got at that we're having at the moment, and that really worries me. That we've had a whole generation of athletes who've had massive amounts of sugar and carbohydrates over the last 10 or 20 years, and I worry about the long-term effect on their health, to be honest. So I think if we can if we can combine the health benefits of a low carb diet with endurance activity and fat as a fuel, then we're much better off.
Yeah, and it's that whole that whole mindset shift of fit. You can be fit, but not necessarily healthy. I remember someone saying it's possible to have a skinny glutton. As an athlete, if I was a junior triathlete, I would hit the bakery. I would eat the lollies. I love my long rides because I'd get to pull out a packet of snakes to fuel it.
Yep, yeah, exactly. I mean, I have people, doing marathons and doing triathlons and so on who don't even have breakfast. Who just have their normal sort of meal the night before and fuel themselves fine. So as I said, you've got everyone's different. You've got to find what's right for you. But as a general principle, reducing the amount of carbs and increasing the good healthy fats, it can be very beneficial for your endurance activity.
But if you are racing a marathon, it's going to take you 3 or 4 hours. Is there anything wrong, so to speak, Peter, with a carbohydrate gel along the way? Or if you've
no, you probably don't need it. I mean, if you're fully fat adapted, and it takes you a while to get fat adapted, but once you are, you're probably not going to need that fuel. But if you find you do, you're running out a bit of energy, then
just have it.
It's like having a hybrid system, isn't it? You're the best of both worlds. You have your basic diet, basic fuel is fat, and then you can top up with some carbs. So I think that's quite a good combination.
Peter, fantastic. Peter, in bringing this into a close, a couple of final questions. A fun question to reveal a little bit of the personality behind the guest, in this case, an expert edition. Who would be 3 people that Dr. Peter Brukner, acclaimed Australian sports doctor, would have at his dinner table? Why? Who and why? And they can be living or past.
Right. Well, that's a really it's a very challenging question.
Of course.
You haven't given me much notice on this one, but for living people, I'd probably grab Tim Noakes. Just probably the smartest guy I know, and a passionate individual who happens to be a friend of mine. I'm very privileged to know him. So he'd be one person. He's a South African, so I'd also love to have Nelson Mandela there as well. I'm sure Tim could bring Nelson along, and that'd be there are lots of people I'd love to have dinner with. Barack Obama. I'd love to have dinner with Barack Obama. I think he's he had his limitations, I think, in the political sort of sphere in the States, but I think he's a visionary and just a great speaker and a great person. So that'd be a good start. But look, there's so many people I'd love to,
of course,
love to pick their brains. That'd be good.
That's a very fueled table. I hope that one's got a low carb, high fat at the dinner table to fuel those brains.
Absolutely.
And yourself, Peter, you summarise a fat lot of good in page 283 in one paragraph. I'm not going to read that out. If you're listening, you must go and pick up a copy of A Fat Lot of Good and read it. But I'm going to challenge you further than the one paragraph. If you had to summarise the key thing you want listeners of this show to take away and implement into one piece of advice, Peter, what would that be? JERF. JERF. Just eat real food. Okay. Simple.
Simple as that.
Peter, physical challenge for the week. Every guest of the Physical Performance Show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. It can be entry level or more complicated or more challenging. But what's Dr. Peter Brukner's physical challenge for the week to listeners going to be?
Well, this morning I do a brief session. I'm a believer in high intensity intermittent activity, so I get on a stationary bike and I do a high intensity activity where I go flat out for 30 seconds on and off and so on. But I also believe that particularly as you get older, strength is really important, and it's really important for people of my vintage in particular. We tend to ignore strength activities. So 20 push-ups. I did 20 push-ups this morning after my bike session, and you can build up to it. You can start off on your knees if you want to, but everyone, at whatever age you are, you should be able to build up to doing 20 push-ups.
So we call it the Dr. Peter Brukner 20 push-up daily challenge.
Sounds good. Doesn't have to be daily, just 2 or 3 times a week.
Okay.
But 20 push-ups. Go for it.
Easy, even better. Peter, if people obviously want to pick up a copy of A Fat Lot of Good, and I encourage you to do so, where can we find the book, and where can we follow more about SugarByHalf, the campaign?
Right. Well, the book is at your favourite bookstore, as they say. Most bookshops have it. You can also get it online, obviously at Amazon, Book Depository, and all those places. There is an e-version that you can also get through your normal places you get iTunes, etc. It's pretty freely available, I think. And you can also go to the Fat Lot of Good website, and they can give you further details on where to get it. So that's just fatlotofgood.com.au. There's a lot of extra information on that. And as far as SugarByHalf goes, again, SugarByHalf.com. We'll tell you lots of what we're doing on the SugarByHalf world, but keep an eye out for our campaign.
Fantastic title. Did you come up with that, or was that the publisher's input, Peter?
No, they were both Fat Lot of Good and SugarByHalf were my ideas. The Fat Lot of Good. Well, I racked my brains for probably a year for a title. I just could not come up with a title. I had all sorts of sort of inane sort of things, and then one day I just sort of thought, of course, it's the obvious title. So anyway, that was my idea.
It's lucky you didn't have the sugar-induced brain fog, or the title might not have been so punchy.
Exactly. I'd never have got there.
Peter, it's important for listeners to note that all proceeds from A Fat Lot of Good go directly to the SugarByHalf campaign. So that's a terrific initiative. Yeah. I'm not out to make money out of this book. I'm out to change people's lives. Yeah, and that's exactly what you're doing, Peter. I appreciate your time today in a full schedule. Thanks for sharing what's basically been years of research into an interview here, and also the book.
My pleasure, Brad.
So there you have it. Another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I trust you enjoyed today's episode featuring Dr. Peter Brukner. Wow, wasn't there some terrific information that Peter shared in that interview? I myself will go back and listen to this multiple times, and I've actually committed to read A Fat Lot of Good annually to keep this information at the top of my mind. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it has already positively impacted my health. I've lost weight, I feel great, and I've just cut out the processed food. I'm stopping now and asking myself, do I really need to eat that, or is there an alternative? So this is really a transformational book and an absolute must read. Now, if you did enjoy today's conversation, please let myself and Dr. Brukner know. Dr. Brukner is very easily found online. Of course, as he mentioned, over on Twitter, at Peter Brukner, Brukner. And online, if you just type in Dr. Brukner's name, you'll find him. But there's, of course, the SugarByHalf.com website to check out as well. And also the fatlotofgood.com.au website is a great resource in conjunction. If you've enjoyed today's episode and you know someone who would benefit from the sharings of Dr. Brukner, then please take the time to share this conversation with them. It's never been easier than from within your smartphone to share a podcast. So please share away. Really, this information can be life-giving and life-changing, as you've just heard. So please be generous, share it around. It would mean a lot to Dr. Brukner and also myself. A big thanks to the faithful folk who have been leaving reviews for the Physical Performance Show over on iTunes. That helps us very simply get into more people's earbuds who, just like yourself, are looking to pursue and perform at their physical best as well. Now, this week, I want to give a shout out to Over63673, who rated the show 5 stars over on iTunes, commenting, good podcast for fitness and well-being. Great and unique insights from many interviews. Some episodes are too long, but you can fast forward through these. Seems to be written for fitness freaks and ultra athletes, but I am an ordinary Joe and I still get a lot out of it. Somewhat inclined to defy successful athletes, which can be excessive, but well worth trying this out. Go for it. Over63673, thank you for taking the time to leave a review. And if you drop me an email, email b.beer@pogophysio.com.au. I'll make sure you get a signed copy of You Can Run Pain Free, the second and revised edition, out to you via the post as a thank you gift for your generous review on iTunes. A big thanks to the team who make the Physical Performance Show possible each and every week. Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, Matthew Olding on all things graphic design, and of course Daryl Misson on all things audio engineering. Another big thank you to today's show sponsor, PhysioCrem. Podcasts are certainly free to download, however, they are not free to produce, and PhysioCrem support goes an enormous way to keep this show coming out each and every week. Now, PhysioCrem have offered up another fantastic PhysioCrem pack, and you can see the pack online at the show notes, pogophysio.com.au, or over on the Instagram handle for the show, at Physical Performance Show. Now, the winner of the last PhysioCrem pack was Ryan Restucio. So, Ryan, a massive congratulations, and we hope you enjoy your PhysioCrem pack. If you'd like to go into the draw to win the current PhysioCrem pack, be sure to jump over to the Physical Performance Show Instagram handle, Physical Performance Show, click on the bio, and there you can leave your name and details to go into the draw to win the great PhysioCrem pack. And don't forget, if you're after some PhysioCrem product, use the promo code 20% off, POGO, over at physiocrem.com.au. Hey guys, thanks for the podsies that are flooding social media. That's simply a screenshot of the episode that you're listening to and enjoying, and tagging myself in at Brad_beer or at Physical Performance Show. And it's so much fun to see the different places, the different episodes that people are enjoying the Physical Performance Show from. So keep the podsies coming. Coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, we bring you a featured performer episode featuring ex-Tour de France and professional cyclist Jonathan Cantwell. Boy, does Jonathan share some fascinating stories around the world of professional cycling, the highs, the lows, and the learnings from his fantastic career. And Jonathan, at the time of this episode being released, is getting ready for the World Triathlon Championships age group to be held here on the Gold Coast in just a few weeks' time. So be sure to tune in next week to the Physical Performance Show. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.